The first cub touched my boot on a Tuesday, 3 days out from the Dorvan relay and halfway through the worst overnight cargo watch of my life. Wasn't supposed to be inside the pen enclosure. Standing Order 7, posted in both Galactic Common and the garrison's own script above the cargo bay hatch, was explicit. No unauthorized personnel within 6 meters of the Vaelthari Shadowcat housing. The Shadowcats were not pets. They were not mascots. They were a deterrent, Commander Orvik's word, used often and with evident satisfaction, loaded aboard the converted troop. Transport. Halvern. Keep 800 displaced colonists from getting ideas during the 17-day transit to the resettlement station. The 3 cubs and their adult alpha were, in Orvik's estimation, the most efficient crowd control asset the garrison possessed. What Orvik had not planned for was a cracked water coupling on the pen's secondary intake line, discovered at 200 hours by a lone cadet on watch who was also the only person on the ship who'd grown up raising livestock on a frontier colony and recognized the sound of pressure bleed at 40 paces. I went in to fix the coupling, that was all. The cubs were awake. They were always awake. Shadowcats don't sleep on a schedule that makes any sense to garrison planners. And the 3 of them were piled in the rear corner of the enclosure, obsidian black and still as poured oil, watching me cross the threshold with their pale reflective eyes. I did not look away. I did not back up. I crossed to the coupling housing on the far wall, pulled my kit and started working. First one reached my boot somewhere around the 3rd minute. Just a touch, the rounded tip of a forepaw, testing. I glanced down, pulled the paw back and looked at me with an expression I recognized from every half-wild barn cat I'd ever met. Not hostility, not affection. Assessment easy, I said, the word my father used with nervous animals, flat, quiet, not a command and not a plea, just a sound that meant, I know you're there and I'm not a threat. Cub put its paw back on my boot and left it there for the rest of the repair. The alpha, a lean, long-bodied female with a scar bisecting her left ear, watched from the back of the enclosure and did not move. I latched the coupling housing, gathered my kit, and left. I filed the repair in the maintenance log and did not mention the cub. By the 5th day I had a problem. They followed me. Not all at once, not dramatically. Shadowcats don't do drama, which is one of the things I came to appreciate about them. First cub simply appeared in the berthing corridor outside my bunk when I came off the 0600. Watch, it sat. I stepped over it, went inside, and lay down. When I woke 4 hours later, it was curled at the foot of my rack, asleep, with the total commitment to sleep that only the very young and the very confident can manage. The 2nd and 3rd cubs materialized over the following 2 days, and by day 7 all 3 were treating my bunk as their primary address. I kept the hatch cracked. I didn't encourage them, didn't pet them or feed them or talk to them beyond the occasional easy when something startled them, and they didn't seem to need encouragement. They had made a decision and were acting on it with the calm certainty of animals that do not second-guess themselves. The alpha came on day 9. She did not curl up. She lay across the threshold of the hatch with her chin on her forepaws and her pale eyes on the corridor, and she stayed there until I left for watch. She was guarding the door. I filed that away and said nothing about it to anyone. Garrison Commander Orvik found out on day 10. I will give him this. He waited until I came off watch to address it, which meant the dressing down happened in the main berthing corridor with approximately 30 colonists and 6 garrison troopers as an audience, which I do not think was the effect he intended. He was a tall man, tall even by Dorvan standards, which run broad and heavy, and he used his height the way some men use rank, leaning it forward into conversations to settle questions before they were asked. He leaned it forward now. The deterrent asset, he said, had been compromised. The Shadowcat's value as a psychological control mechanism depended on the colonists maintaining a baseline fear response, and a cadet parading them through the berthing decks like lapdogs was actively undermining garrison security. He used the phrase, "turret asset." He used the phrase, "unauthorized access," 3 times. He suggested that I had endangered myself, the other passengers, and the mission through what he termed, with audible disdain, misplaced colonial familiarity with dangerous fauna. Stood at parade rest and listened. The 3 cubs sat at my feet. They had followed me off watch. I hadn't noticed until Orvek's first sentence, and by then it was too late to do anything about it. They sat in a neat line, shoulder to shoulder, pale eyes moving between Orvek's face and mine, with the focused attention of animals that are deciding something. Orvek talked for 6 minutes. I know because I counted. When he finished, I said, "Yes, sir, understood, sir." He looked at the cubs. He looked at me. He opened his mouth, closed it, and walked away. The trooper nearest me, a young woman named Pellis who had been trying not to laugh for the last 4 minutes, leaned in and said very quietly, "He's going to pretend that went well." "Most people do," I said. The trouble came on day 13, 4 days before landfall. 3 men, colonists older, the kind of desperate that comes from losing a farm and a home and a future in the same season, had been watching the garrison's rotation patterns for a week. I learned this afterward. What I knew at the time was that I was alone in the cargo bay at 2100 hours, running the evening check on the water systems, and the hatch opened and they came in. And the tallest one had a length of pipe, and the other 2 had the look of men who had agreed to something, couldn't take back. They wanted the supply block codes. The garrison kept the resettlement ration packs behind a coded partition. Standard procedure, badly explained to the colonists, which was a garrison failure and not an excuse for what happened next. But it is worth noting, these 3 had decided that the codes were the answer to a problem that actually had a different answer, and they had decided to get the codes from whoever was unlucky enough to be alone down here. That was me. "I'm going to ask you to leave," I said. My voice came out level. I was surprised by that. The tall one moved the pipe. "Coots." I looked at him. I looked at the pipe. I thought about the 6 months I'd spent on the Dorfan frontier, learning that the most dangerous thing you can do with a frightened animal is show fear, because fear confirms its read of the situation and there is no negotiating after that. "Leave," I said. Same register, my father's voice. "I know you're there. I'm not a threat, but I'm also not moving." They didn't leave. What happened in the next 45 seconds I am going to describe as plainly as I can. The cargo bay hatch, the one I had come through, opened again. It opened because shadow cats can work lever-style latches. I had learned this on day 4 and had not to mention it to anyone. The alpha came through first, then the cubs, single file, moving low and fast across the deck, with the absolute silence. That is the thing about shadow cats that never stops being remarkable no matter how many times you see it. The tall man dropped the pipe. I heard it ring off the deck plating. I don't know exactly what the alpha did next because I was watching the cubs fan out to my left and right. And I was watching the 3 men, and I was watching the expressions on their faces cycle through surprise, and then fear, and then the specific, bottom of the stomach terror that arrives when you understand that the thing in front of you is not performing. The alpha was not snarling. She was not posturing. She was just there, between those 3 men and me, and her pale eyes were doing the work that her silence was set up to do. "Down," I said to the men. They went down. All 3 on the deck, hands visible, the tall one making a sound I am choosing not to describe, sat against the bulkhead. Sable. I had started calling the alpha Sable sometime around day 8. I don't know exactly when. Put her head in my lap, and the 3 cubs arranged themselves around me in a loose circle, and that was how the garrison response team found us. When they came through the hatch 4 minutes later, weapons up and ready for a crisis. The crisis was 3 men on the deck, unhurt, and a cadet sitting against the bulkhead with a shadow cat's head in her lap, eating a nutrition bar she'd had in her breast pocket, because it had been a long watch. Commander Orvek arrived 90 seconds after his response team. He stood in the hatchway and looked at the scene for a long moment. Pellis was behind him. I could see her face over his shoulder. The asset, Orvek said finally, performed as intended. Nobody said anything. Response team looked at the ceiling. Pellis looked at me. "Yes, sir," I said. He left. The 3 cubs immediately resettled. The one I'd started thinking of as the eldest put its chin on my knee, exhaled through its nose in that long, low way they have, and closed its eyes. We had 4 days left to landfall. I was already fairly certain that Sable was not going back in the pen. The cubs had made their position clear on that point, sometime around day 5. And alpha shadow cats, in my experience, do not revisit settled questions. Some things once decided stay decided. That's all there is to it, really. That's the whole story. Except this. On the morning of landfall, when Treese, Halvern, docked at resettlement station Oroth N7 and the colonists filed off the ramp into their new uncertain lives, Orvik submitted the after-action report. I read a copy later, because Pellis had a copy, and she thought I'd want to know. In the section marked Asset Performance, he wrote, Shadowcat unit demonstrated full operational readiness. Threat neutralized without garrison intervention. Recommend continued deployment. He did not mention my name. He did not mention that Sable walked off that ship at my left heel, that the Cubs came down the ramp in formation behind me, or that every colonist on the landing deck stopped and stared and stepped back, not from fear, or not only from fear but from the particular stillness that comes over a crowd when it witnesses something it doesn't have a category for. I didn't need him to mention it. Sable knew. The Cubs knew. And I was already thinking about what I was going to the station's garrison commander when she asked me to explain why I had arrived with 4 Shadowcats and no authorization paperwork. Probably easy. It usually works.